Welcome to The Pipeline, the Western Standard's weekly current affairs show. I am Western Standard publisher Derek Fildebrandt. I'm sitting here in our Calgary office with our digital editor and or podcast editor. We have to really figure out what we're calling
a number of titles.
Yeah, well, not many titles, but Cory Morgan, also a columnist with the Western Standard, and Dave Naylor, Western Standard news editor extraordinaire, also out of Calgary, but staying a little closer at home with the snowstorm that's coming down today. Today, we're going to be discussing a number of hot topics. We're going to be discussing a potential federal election call coming out of Ottawa today. The federal Liberals threatening to call an election if the opposition forms an anti-corruption committee. Quite a campaign slogan if you've ever seen one. We'll be giving you an update on both the BC and Saskatchewan elections, and we're going to be talking about Mohammed cartoons. Oh, by the way, I think we actually had one in the corner the whole time we were talking. Mohammed cartoons are wonderful. I love them.
Homage to Mo.
Gotta love Mo. So, more Mo. So, we'll get right into it. But before we start, just a reminder that the Western Standard is one of the few media outlets in Canada that does not receive government funding and does not apply for government media licensing. If you support the work we do, you like what you're seeing and reading, please consider becoming a member at westernstandardonline.com. For $5, $10, or $20 a month, you can help to ensure that we've got a genuinely free press here in Western Canada. But let's get started. We'll deal with the potential federal election here that we're seeing. Dave, why don't you set up what's happening in Ottawa right now with this anti-corruption committee and a potential election?
Right now in Ottawa, Derek, it looks like we have avoided the snappy election. Deputy Prime Minister Singh has come out and said that the NDP will support the government or will not vote to hold an election. This all came about with the Finance Committee and the Tories and the Bloc on that Finance Committee that's looking into the WE scandal. They wanted to set up an anti-corruption committee that to look into stuff exactly like this WE scandal, where members of the Trudeau's family profited hundreds of thousands of dollars. His mother, his brother, his wife. And they wanted to give the committee more powers. Obviously, the Liberals have something to hide. If they're willing to call an election in the middle of a pandemic, they must have something to hide. But it's it still could happen. It still could come down to a vote this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, in the House of Commons. And pundits are saying it could come down to one independent vote, and that's Judy Wilson-Raybould. And wouldn't that be an irony if it did come down to her vote, guys?
Hell hath no fury like an independent scorned. So sorry, Dave, that is really breaking news. I guess kind of mixing up our broadcast. You're saying that the NDP have caved. They're not going to support the creation of the anti-corruption committee anymore?
That is correct. They're still going to go hard after the government, but the NDP does not want an election right now. They don't have the finances. They don't have the infrastructure in place. So it looks like the NDP are going to support the Trudeau government, and an election will be avoided.
Well, I don't think any of the parties really wanted an election, except possibly the Liberals. Like an election is a way to, especially if they can secure a majority, it means there'll never be answers on the We Charity scandal. It kind of completely shuts that down. This is, I don't know, this is extraordinary, although not entirely surprising that the NDP have caved in. Cory, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's striking. I mean, these games of chicken are going to come with a minority government, but this one was really coming close to the brink, and just over something that, I mean, the Liberals are becoming almost hysteric on trying to cover up what's going on with this WE scandal. Like it's obvious that there's more hiding in there. I mean, the way Wayne Easter shut down that committee meeting last week, the way that they were willing to die on this hill. I mean, as you said, perhaps they might want to go to the polls, but you want to go on the polls on the right issue. You want to fall on the right sword, and going to the polls to say we must take it to all Canadians to avoid having an anti-corruption committee forming is not something that any government would want to put themselves forward to the people on. So there's just something bizarre going on. I think part of it too was just Deputy Prime Minister Singh, as you're putting it, I mean, they've got to establish themselves. There are a couple of dogs that are circling. They don't want to admit that the other one is in control at any given time. So they got to try and save face on these issues and push back and push close to the brink, but neither of them necessarily really wants to go over. If we're going to see this happening with anything controversial coming before Parliament in the next few months, so one of these times it's going to fall. Like, you can't maintain much longer with it constantly coming to threatening a confidence vote to stop things from a majority of opposition parties getting up to do something.
Why not?
Well, because it does get tiresome. And of course, they're not afraid of being tiresome either. But eventually, one of them is going to have to draw their line in the sand with their own party members, their supporters, and saying, well, okay, we're going ahead. And we'll see what happens. So this time might have been narrowly averted, but now they're going to see how far they can push on something of more substance than perhaps an anti-corruption committee.
Yeah, this is a pretty humiliating backdown for the NDP, really confirming their status as the junior coalition partner in the current government, really entrenching that. But they have been, the Liberals have been, as you just said, fanatical and breathless about this. Dave just, I think this morning, published a story on a Liberal MP who said that attempts to create an anti-corruption committee were McCarthyist. I don't know. I don't ever see a problem with hunting down commies, but that's a different story. But in this case, it's a committee to explore corruption on a very large scale involving potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of spending that the government was intending to release to this group. And that's considered McCarthyist. Like, they're quite fanatical about this. But you know what? I actually think most Liberal MPs believe it. I mean, like, I can tell you, when you're in a caucus, there is some Kool-Aid. There's a lot of Kool-Aid to be passed around, and people there believe it. So there's no signs that the Liberal caucus has anyone really bristling at this. I mean, the person with any real principle already left it or was kicked out. Judy Raymond-Waybolt and Jane Philippot, only one of which was reelected. Well, let's. We got a couple comments we can look at. I'm not sure how relevant they are. Clint Upham says, I'm not sure if it's worth mentioning up, but I've noticed some clickbait-style headlines of our elected CPC members when doing live stream videos. I'm losing faith in them by the day. Clint, that is because you're not watching it if they don't use clickbait headlines. We've really tried hard here at the Western Standard not to use clickbait. I mean, clickbait is what you call a headline that you don't like but is catchy. If you do like a headline that's catchy, you just call it a good headline. And as the publisher here, I can tell you it's a difficult task to try and find the right balance between getting people interested and making sure it's representing what it's about. But yeah, I've certainly seen this, and most MPs in all parties, no one even knows who they are, even in their own ridings, outside of a couple of dozen people. So this is their way of trying to actually get heard, because who's interested in interviewing most MPs when the media know very well that they have got no power?
Yeah, well, they've been doing some live feeds, which are a valuable tool. But at the same time, there have been a couple I have to admit, too, I've clicked onto with a headline of the live feed. I think that perhaps this was Clint's referencing. I won't bother, wish MPs or whatnot, but it sounds like something very breaking and something big, and then you get onto it, and then suddenly it's more like a fundraising pitch, and you're not getting much new out of it, and so on. And that frustrates me because, okay, well, I listened in. I thought you had something that was really going to grab me and something new, and here I'm just, okay, that was the headline. Now, please, can you contribute because we might have an election?
Just think of it. Think of clickbait headlines as you're on a dating app. You're on Tinder, and there's a very enticing-looking picture, and you show up for the date, and it's not quite there. Well, they're going to say, well, you wouldn't have showed up for the date anyway if I didn't have that nice, very glamorous-looking picture. So just buyer beware, be it Tinder or CBC or members of Parliament. It's going to be the same thing.
Yeah, it's just the way of the times.
Let's go on to Keith Lorison. My understanding is that we got a $30 million advance on the project. Did they return the money?
Yes, they have.
They have?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, the project didn't go ahead, so they returned.
They've paid back the money.
Okay, well, there we go.
One good thing.
I think this one's more of a comment. Cory nailed it. I thought an election was breaking news. Haha. I don't know what you're talking about, Derek. Okay. Maybe I don't know what Clint's talking about. We're not. Well, Clint likes you at least. There's at least one. Okay. Well, I think most experts are not really predicting this Parliament to last much beyond the spring. That being said, I mean, the NDP, they just don't have the money right now. They consider themselves fortunate in the last election to not lose even more seats than they already did. They lost like half their caucus, but they declared it a victory because they were supposed to lose 4/5 of their caucus. Yeah. So, I guess it's all relative. I remember 2015 with the Wild Rose, we won 22 seats, and we felt like we had just conquered the world because we had come back from the death after the mass floor crossing. We're down to 5 seats, only 3 guys running for re-election. So we won 22 seats, and we thought it was the best thing in the world. So I guess it's all relative. It's all relative. But yeah, the NDP are just not in the mood for an election. I don't know. How long do you think they can drag this out for and still be able to tell their supporters there's a point to voting NDP rather than just going for Liberal and making it safe?
Well, that's what I mean, is this brinkmanship. I mean, the NDP get a little weaker every time they cave on it. So eventually they'll have to draw a line in the sand and stick to it. So
they didn't draw the line at corruption.
Well, yeah. But if they keep getting pushed back and back, they're going to lose their own base, and the pressures will just come on. I mean, they do accept that they're typically, right now is as powerful as they'll ever get. That's their best possible position typically is holding a balance of power in a minority government. But at the same time, they've got to stand on their point of principle. Then they're not looking to win; they're looking to be principled, and their supporters are going to get more and more upset every time they seem to back down on something that they feel is important. So eventually, they're just going to have to cave and bring that government down. We'll see how this brinkmanship goes in the next few months, I guess.
Yeah. Oh well, just an update from I guess confusion with Clint. He was confused. I was talking about what Tinder. But he also says we can also use Grindr if that's your thing.
Well, he's familiar with the apps. Then
all power to you. Whatever app you want to use. Good on you. Okay, well let's move on to.
My hands are above the counter.
What was it? Was it the New York Post or Times? What was it?
Who was he with? Well, he was also a CNN commentator. Whatever that gentleman's name was. I ranted about him and. Just that reminder, people, the cameras and mics may always be hot. If you really feel compelled to have to do something to yourself, perhaps just make sure.
You know what? I don't even trust that the government's not watching. So always just put a piece of tape or something over your camera. You never know. Yeah. But definitely don't do things while you're on a work call with Zoom.
No, especially if you're a public figure who used to be employed.
Yeah. Anyway, let's very quickly move on from this topic.
Yeah.
So let's talk British Columbia. We've got we're headed into the final weekend of the campaign. New polls out. Dave, why don't you bring us up to speed?
Yeah, I don't think it's anything that the Liberals will be dancing in the middle of the streets from. But the latest poll this week shows that the gap is narrowing. John Horgan NDP is down from 49% to 45%, and the Wilkinson Liberals have gained 2 percentage points up to 35%. So it's still a fairly substantial lead, and I don't think anybody's picking anything other than a Horgan majority on Saturday.
Yeah, I suppose it's not worth dancing in the streets over. It's those kind of numbers show there's no chance. I mean, even if the polls are over-pegging the NDP, there's just no way they're going to get anything but a majority. I guess the question is it a crushing majority or not? Cory, do you think there's really anything that can happen at this point in the campaign of BC?
Extremely unlikely, especially with so many mail-in ballots having gone too. So even if an issue broke at this point, a lot of people already cast their ballot. So they couldn't change their mind and get that letter back and change it. I mean, polls have been absurdly wrong over the years. We've seen that a number of times, but that's such a wide gap that it's pretty unlikely to see that change. But what we can watch for, and we'll be covering that live on Saturday night, is some symbolic victories. I mean, there's a lot of, swing ridings. There's a new Green leader, and the Greens are a much bigger player in BC. I mean, they're not going to win the election, but they want to win a handful of seats. They certainly, again, held that little balance of power for a while. A few of those lower mainland seats, just to see which way they may go. There might be some incumbents coming and going, but as for forming government, it's looking like at this point, it's going to be a crushing victory for Horgan.
Yeah, I think the biggest loser in this is going to be the Greens, because even if they held on to all three of their seats, which they're not expected to, they're expected to probably come away with one or two. But even if they held on to all three, even if they gained a couple of seats, they're not going to have the balance of power. That was a very specific and rare circumstance that is really the sweet spot for small third parties to have, especially one with just 3 seats. They were really in the sweet spot and able to control a large degree of things. And John Horgan said, "Screw you! You already gave me the premier's chair. I had it for long enough. Polls are good, and I'm done with you." So the Greens, I think, are going to have a hard time recovering in this. Even British Columbians who were sympathetic to the plight of the Greens here, that the NDP were playing dirty pool, they're going to say, "Yeah, well, we might like the Greens, but at the end of the day, what's going to be the point of them?" So I think it's going to make it hard for them in the long term to justify their relevancy. And frankly, I just have again, we've discussed this in previous episodes, especially during the BC leaders debate. What's the point of a BC Green? I mean, it's just you're just like a New Democrat, but in opposition. So I'm not really sure what the point is. It's hard for me to see through their eyes because they're just such a radically different ideology. But I think there's going to be big questions coming out of this election about what the point of the BC Greens is.
Well, they've also kind of been representing, though, that far left wing of even the NDP. Because, I mean, in being in power this long, the NDP became pragmatic. They had to. When you get into government, it's one thing to stand on all your socialist principles when you're an up-and-comer. Once you're in, you've actually got to start getting a little more realistic about some things. But then that disenfranchises the real hardcore left, the real activists, the radicals. And a lot of them have gone around the Greens. They had some scandals about, quotas and whatnot for their leadership and social justice issues.
Yeah. They had a retiring MLA, and white men are not allowed to replace them in incumbent seats. It has to be a woman or a visible minority of some kind. Yeah. But then they had a federal NDP heavyweight come in, and they waived the rule. And then so there was kind of a whole scandal there because the NDP dared to have a white man as a candidate.
But that's where they position themselves, I guess, is to try and grab that real fringe for the NDP, which, if anything, I think does Horgan a favor because it lets off steam. When you've got the real hardcores, the radicals, the crazy ones, you can kind of quietly say, well, perhaps
when the BC NDP is not crazy enough for you,
that's right.
There's always someone.
Go Green.
Yeah. Dave, there's another story coming out of BC today with you. The BC Liberals running an ad warning against vote splitting with the very small but their BC Conservative Party. Do you want to fill us in on that?
Yeah, the BC Conservatives last election, Derek, took 0.5% of the vote. Not a lot, but the Liberals have put out an ad today on Facebook urging voters not to vote Conservative because of vote splitting. They say those 0.05% of votes gave the Horgan NDP 2 additional seats, and those were the seats that Horgan needed to consolidate his power. So they're saying a vote for the Conservative is really a vote for the NDP, and you might as well stick your vote with the Liberals.
Yeah, I mean, 0.5% of the vote isn't that much, but it's and they didn't have candidates in a lot of the ridings, but I guess they were around. I mean, it might be fast. I think there's only 2 provinces in Canada that have no explicitly Conservative Party on the ballot, or major Conservative Party, I should say. That is Quebec but the sort of Conservative option is the CAQ, the CAQ. What a terrible acronym. I'm not sure if it translates the same way in French, but and then British Columbia, where you have the Greens, you have the NDP, and then you have the Liberals, and Conservatives are supposed to just hold their nose and be a part of it. I mean, you could maybe say Saskatchewan, but I think the Saskatchewan Party is a pretty conventional center-right party by now. It's it can be simply put on par with the UCP or the Ontario PCs. Cory, do you think this is an effective strategy for the Liberals to say to the few disenfranchised people thinking about voting Conservative as a protest, come back home to the Liberal mothership?
I don't know. It sounds desperate. I mean, I tried to look to see signs of life from the Conservative Party because they do have a long history in BC, though they've been dead for quite some time. I mean, with the obliteration of social credit, though, it seemed it would have left some room for a Conservative named party to come up. But I did actually send communications to the Conservative Party leadership and was starting towards moving on an interview, and then they suddenly ghosted me. So they appear to like being invisible, and that's no problem. I'm happy to help them with that. It just seems kind of bizarre with such a minor player for the Liberals to take the time to speak up on it. I mean, they should be courting centrist NDP voters to say, look, we need more reasonable voices to come on over to us. You're not going to win it by chasing after.
Or alternatively, if you're trying to get Conservative voters to vote for you, maybe try being a little bit conservative. Like that's an idea for them. And to their credit, like they do have one Conservative policy, if you can call it that, in their platform. That's the ending the ICBC monopoly on auto insurance. I mean, it's in the right direction. I mean, I think it's insane to even have a government auto insurance company, but I mean, like that's an olive branch to people who are, to the right of Justin Trudeau. But maybe they should do a bit more. The Liberals are promising huge deficits. They're promising increases in the carbon tax. They're doing, they're running more or less as Liberals in most other provinces. The only difference is their relative position to their main opposition is that they're on the right of that main opposition, so that they look more reasonable. But if the BC Liberals, so some free advice for BC Liberals, if you want Conservative votes, try being mildly conservative.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it too, though, is there has been no Conservative contender managing to grab that disenfranchised Conservatives and bring them up. So the Liberals can afford to keep swinging left.
Well, I know the Conservatives have been trying there for some time. I remember right after I finished university, I lived in British Columbia, Victoria for a year. I didn't really know much about the politics of it, but I very much quickly figured out that all these Conservatives told me to vote Liberal were wrong. And I remember I called up the number for the BC Conservative Party, and the leader answered the phone. He's just like, hello. I'm like, who's this? He's like, I forgot the name of the guy. I'm like, is this the BC Conservative Party? He's like, I'm the leader. I'm like, I didn't expect that. So it was a pretty mom pop operation.
Got to start somewhere, though.
They did have a blip, I think, 1 or 2 cycles ago, where they had a former, I'm not sure if it was John Cummins or something, but they had a former federal Conservative MP come in. They've had brief moments where they've tried to get going and had a little bit of success, but they have been pretty successful at cowing center-right voters in BC into just saying, look, you might hate the Liberals, but you hate the NDP more. And that's a pretty successful strategy in most jurisdictions. Okay, well, let's move on to our friends in Saskatchewan here. Dave, why don't you give us an update on where the polls are at there? Also, the final weekend as we head in.
Derek, you've heard the phrase "ahead by a country mile." That doesn't even begin to describe the lead that Premier Scott Moe has on the NDP in Saskatchewan. He's now up by 25 points. A recent poll had the Saskatchewan Party 56% and the NDP at 31%. So I think much like the British Columbia election, this one's not going to be close, and it'll be another majority for Premier Moe and the Saskatchewan Party.
Well, it sounds like it'll be even less close than British Columbia. The gap is even larger, and there's no third party to complicate. Well, there are other parties, but there's no other party with seats in the legislature or that is very likely, I think, to win a seat. It's really just a two-horse race here. Actually, in a multi-party system, it goes to the advantage generally of the really big party, because then they, the splits more often work in their favor if you're the really big party with the big lead. But yeah, this looks like a crushing lead for Scott Moe. I think it was New Brunswick, in the early 90s under Frank McKenna. They won every single seat in the legislature, and the Liberal premier had to appoint the PC leader is the unofficial leader of the official opposition or something, and he sat in the gallery and asked questions, but he had to be very polite in his questions, because if he wasn't, the premier could just kick him out of the legislature because he didn't actually have a seat. But I think that was a bit of again, there were more parties involved, and the splits worked in a certain way so that the BC Liberals won literally every single seat. That will be a very boring legislature.
And it's not a healthy one. I mean, a democracy, an opposition is critical. It's important. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be threatening power, but you've got to have at least a diverse number of members who are going to dig into some issues, research things, call up, hold the government to account on things, whether it's left or right, it doesn't matter. So it's actually kind of dangerous for Saskatchewan. You don't want a government with too strong a hold on power. That's never good.
Well, I don't think they're looking at Frank McKenna style every single seat, because the NDP do have certain geographical concentrations.
Strongholds in Regina and Saskatoon.
The downtowns of the two major cities. Sorry, Saskatchewan, if we call those major cities. Yeah. But Saskatoon and Regina. The NDP in the downtown core is there. I mean, geez, there was even a Liberal in Regina, Wisconsin, till a year ago. So there are still going to be some NDP MLAs there. They're just going to be possibly an even smaller group than they are right now.
Yeah, just hope there's a voice for reason and balance. I mean, remember back in Saskatchewan, the reason the Conservatives got obliterated was divine. It was the old saying, "To err is human, to truly F up is divine." With the corruption they had in their caucus,
it was bad.
It was outstanding, and it put the party into the history books. They're done. They're gone. That's why the Saskatchewan party's here today. So let's just hope that Saskatchewan has a good tempered government coming out of this next election. But yeah, you'd be really gambling to think that to bet on anybody else but Mo right now.
Yeah, and I guess I'll be able to bring this back to Ottawa here. I mean, if we've now seen, I think it was Nova Scotia that had an election, moving their, no, New Brunswick had an election, moving their minority PC government to a majority. BC looks like it's going to do that, going from a minority semi-coalition to a majority, and Saskatchewan's going to go from majority to another majority, perhaps an increased majority. If that happens, the temptation for Trudeau is going to be tremendous to engineer his defeat in the House. You'll have then had two governments go from minority to majority status, and another one keep itself. This is the time of incumbents, a crisis time and panic time. People tend to rally around the flag. They rally around the strong man leader. People like incumbents. They like stability. And so that, I think, is resulting, at least in Canada, where we kind of like our politicians milquetoast and boring, very much in contrast to how things are in the States right now. Yeah, I think this is going to really add to the temptation for Trudeau to engineer his defeat. Dave, is there? I know Ottawa is not our main focus of attention here, but it unfortunately still exists. So, are there any signs in Ottawa right now that Trudeau is going to have other opportunities to engineer his defeat and get an election that I increasingly suspect that he wants?
I think his major problem right now is the time of year, Derek. Canadians traditionally have not gone to the polls in the dead of winter, and it's getting to the point now where we're going to be in winter across the country. That and the pandemic makes any sort of election call now very, very dicey. I think it all depends on what he's trying to hide in this wee committee. Trudeau's, I'm sure Trudeau's thinking right now of the next way he can bring his own government down, because that's the way he operates.
Yeah, well, we had an election in the dead of winter, actually over Christmas, even in 2005-06, when Paul Martin was defeated by Stephen Harper when he formed his first minority government. What they did is, because it was over Christmas, they actually had a very long writ period so that it would go into the new year, because so that otherwise the writ would have been between Christmas and New Year's or something, because you can always draw that out.
Yeah, they took a holiday break in the campaign for about a week in the middle of it. It was really different that
It
time.
was a very different election, but in that case, all three major opposition parties were up in the polls. They all had money for an election. And the Liberals were, there was just no possible way for the opposition parties to support it. It was the height of the sponsorship scandal. They were dead. I don't know. I think Trudeau wants an election now, and when the government wants an election, they can find a lot of ways to do it. The Conservatives are obliged to, like, they're supposed to be the only party that has a real ideological difference with the bloc of left parties, the four other parties that are there. They are essentially obliged to oppose the government on virtually everything. They're the official opposition. They're the government waiting. So Trudeau's got to, if Trudeau wants an election, he has to find something to unite all the other ones. And traditionally, that has been ethics issues. That is not a strictly left-right issue. So, you know, Trudeau and his family taking money from a, you know, what increasingly does not look like a real charity, to do this kind of stuff, and then giving them a multi-$100 million contract, sole source without competition, that would normally unite all the opposition parties. So Trudeau might have a real problem getting the NDP to not vote against him. I think Trudeau wanted the NDP to vote for their anti-corruption committee because that's the only stuff that can unite opposition parties that are on both the left and the center right now. And they didn't do it. The NDP, I think, are so desperate to avoid an election, they will vote for anything at this point.
Well, if he's going to engineer an election, I mean, he's going to have to find the right hill to die on. So come up with some fiscal plan that's going to be, so this is so important that we have to take it to Canadians. In this time of crisis, you know, we must do this to save everybody. Thus, we have to get behind the Liberals. But you can always carefully throw a poison pill in there. I mean, it's one area easily enough to lose NDP support. Take a swipe at the unions somehow. Throw a little something that smells of right-to-work legislation, or just a little, just enough, because, I mean, if the unions turn, the NDP can't support it. They can't. I mean, they decimate it.
If they do, so it would have to be, we're long over, this is the longest Canada in its history, I think, has ever gone without a budget. And a budget, you can put in stuff that piss off people on all sides, a la Jim Prentice.
It's not that hard.
You consult your budget with things that everybody's got something to like, but everyone's got something to hate.
So I could see that happening in spring, you know, or after Christmas. I mean, finding that hill and trying to model it, if things don't fall apart beforehand, over something like, as we saw today, coming close.
Well, let's go even further away than Ottawa. Let's go all the way to Paris and sort of back home. And let's talk about Mohammed cartoons and what's going on, Murder in Paris, that has kind of sparked this. Dave, why don't you give us some background on what's going on with the latest in cartoons?
Absolutely horrible story this week out of Paris, Derek. A teacher at a school in a northern suburb was teaching his class about censorship. He was a history teacher and a geography teacher, and they were talking about censorship. And he brought up the old Danish Mohammed cartoons from back in the mid-2000s. These cartoons showed the Prophet Mohammed, and it was very, very offensive to Muslims. There was marches around the world, terrorist attacks. You remember the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack in Paris that killed a dozen people. So this teacher had shown his class these cartoons. The fact that he did this got out to some parents of some Muslim students. Apparently one of the Muslim parents declared a fatwa, holy war, on the teacher, and a terrorist stood outside the school. And
sorry, anyone can declare a fatwa? Okay, I'm declaring a fatwa.
The terrorist waited outside the school. The teacher was pointed out to him, and the teacher was then horribly mutilated and decapitated. Responding police shot the terrorist dead. Teacher has since become a hero in France and been given the country's highest awards. But you know, the Western Standard has a long history with these cartoons, Derek, and I'll let you go through that.
Yeah, I suppose we do. This is this was really kind of the finest hour of the Western Standard, long before any of us were involved with it. I was a mere subscriber to it. I was in university at the time when these cartoons came out, and there were just, there were riots and bombings all over the planet. It was the biggest story on the planet for months on end, and not a single media outlet in Canada or even across the world, except for the Western Standard and another outlet out of Israel, were the only two on the planet of any significance to publish the cartoons. And I remember just being so proud to get my Western Standard that they had the balls to do this. I remember I clipped some cartoons out and I posted them around the university just to see what would happen. I heard people scream and yell, and as I ran away, it was as if people had seen a murder scene. It was quite something. And the human rights commissions and the courts took the Western Standard to court to try and silence it, and the Western Standard had none of it, fought it the whole way. And then it was so embarrassing for the government, they tried to withdraw themselves from the case, and the Western Standard said, no, we're guilty of whatever hate crimes you are accusing us of, because they wanted to go to the Supreme Court and challenge the Human Rights Commission's ability to censor the media. It was really a historic moment that made me very proud just to be a subscriber of the Western Standard at that time. Fast forward, 2015, we had the Charlie Hebdo murders. Dozen people viciously massacred at the Charlie Hebdo. They're kind of like a magazine, cartoon magazine in Paris. I don't read French, but the cartoons don't look particularly funny. But that's not the point. You're allowed to have them, and so they had some stuff that was offensive. They'd show like a Muslim cleric making out with a Charlie Hebdo sketch artist. Offensive to some people, but apparently offensive enough to get a bunch of people killed. Just a month ago, a meat cleaver attack outside the Charlie Hebdo offices, because Charlie Hebdo republished the cartoons again. Well, when this happened in France, because a man was killed over this, I felt that the Western Standard had an obligation, because of our history associated with this, one of the only two media outlets on the planet to publish the Mohammed cartoons after the initial round of riots when these cartoons came out of Denmark. So we republished them. We've had tremendous support, I think, from people. Our intent is not to offend our Muslim readers and viewers. We value you just as much as heathens like Cory and
I'm a dedicated pastafarian.
There you go.
Yes.
To each their own. So, the intention isn't to offend. If anyone had been murdered over the Piss Christ so-called art display, I would have displayed that too. I linked to it on the website. It offends me as a Christian, but that's too bad for my feelings. I have no right to silence anybody. So we published this. We've had tremendous feedback. We did have one message from a Hussein something. I forget his last name. His name was Hussein something. And he sent a curt letter to the editor, fuck off. I wanted him to elaborate a little bit more. If he would elaborate a bit more, I'd be very happy to share the whole thing and all of its expletive glory. We want to hear from you if you don't think we should be doing this. But I felt it was the right thing to do for media to assert their right to do this. I remember just how cowardly the CBC and the Toronto Star were. They were at the time they were saying, "Oh, this is culturally insensitive." Cultural sensitivities that they don't show towards Christians or Jews. Either you have to be culturally sensitive and step on eggshells for everybody, or for nobody, and that's the right way to do it. But even more conservative outlets like the National Post didn't do it. Their reasoning, I thought, was a bit better. Is like they said, well, we're afraid of being bombed or attacked. And that's fair. I mean, I'm not going to say that terrorists won't get shot if they attack the Western Standard offices. But, that's a legitimate concern to have, and I get it. But I felt that we had to do it to assert our right to do it. I do think rights are use them or lose them from time to time. Maybe Cory and Dave, you guys can chime in on how this whole thing played out.
Well, yeah, with these, I mean, it's I know that those cartoons are offensive to devout Muslims, and I know that 99.9% of them are going to curse or at worst send an email telling us to fuck off. I love getting all those emails anyways.
I love let the hate flow.
Oh yes, but I mean, they're not going to go out and assault somebody or cut their heads off or things like that. But unfortunately, there are a tiny number of them who feel that a violent response is the way to deal with it. And understandably, people get afraid of that. Publishers get afraid of that. Reporters get afraid of it. But we can't let that sort of action suppress coverage of things. I mean, the Western Standard didn't even really initially publish those pictures to offend people, though they knew it was going to happen. But it's because it was a current story. I mean, we're
Just
talking
to show we can do it.
Well,
yeah.
and to say this is the cartoons that set off the riots all over the place. How can we talk about them but not actually show them? How offensive were they? What were they? You can't let that shut you down. And then the worst part was the follow-up with Canadian institutions such as the Human Rights Commission and their kangaroo court and the others saying you can't do that. And for people like you and I and Ezra was, I mean, it's when you're told you can't do that,
we have to do it.
We're like, F you, we're going to do it, and we're going to double down. And I mean, that's part of it too, is letting people know with the free press, free expression, free speech. If you keep pushing us, we're only going to get worse. So lay off. I'd be more than happy if we don't have to talk about Muslim, cartoons of Mohammed ever again. But it's becoming a story because we're being told that we can't, and it's just not going to happen. Those murders were horrific over something that really, again, is trivial. I mean, not trivial to devout followers, but I mean, it's just going to happen. You're going to see things you don't like. Get over it. We need a free world, a secular world, as far as laws go, anyways, and that's why the standard's not going to be pushed around.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, do you have any closing thoughts before we go?
No, just to say, busy weekend ahead. The second part of the UCP AGM is on Saturday. Many big speakers, including Erin O'Toole and Leslyn Lewis and Jason Kenney with a keynote address. So I'll be covering that. There's the election out of BC on Saturday night. So it should be a fun weekend.
Sorry, the UCP is splitting their AGM up into 2 weekends? Because it's virtual?
Yes, they had the first part last weekend with all the sort of policies and the motions and whatnot, and then the speeches are this Saturday.
Interesting. Well, yeah, we'll continue to cover that. I mean, it's an interesting experiment in how parties can try to make the best of these virtual AGMs. They seem to have, by all reports, managed to actually pull it off. I'm not. Highly doubtful it's going to have the same enjoyment because you're not around seeing your friends or frenemies and whatever you're going to see at these things. But you're lacking the interaction there. They're not drinking in the hospitality suites and in the bars after. But for the actual brass tacks of the policies and all this stuff, they seem to be pulling it off reasonably well.
They've had 1,400 people have registered for it, so it seems to be a bit of a success.
Yeah. Well, before we go, just a heads up on Dave, BC election, that is Saturday or is Sunday?
Saturday night.
Saturday?
Yeah, even though they have said they will not have final results for several weeks because of the number of mail-in ballots. But yeah, it's Saturday.
Okay, well, tune in here Saturday evening. We're going to have live coverage of the BC election as the results, at least as we have them come in. And the same on Monday, we're going to have live results for the Saskatchewan election.
Saskatchewan Monday or Tuesday?
Oh, Dave, yeah.
It's the 26th. So Monday, I guess.
Okay. Just want to be sure before we tell people.
Yeah. Well,
whatever night the Saskatchewan one on the 26th, then, yeah, we'll be here and we'll be covering it.
Yeah, and we'll send out, if you're subscribed to our email list, you'll get a notification. So westernstandardonline.com. As I said before, make sure you become a member. Also, you can also just sign up for our email newsletter. We'll send you top stories of the day, normally 5 or 6 days a week, and we'll give you a notification when we're doing live broadcasts like we will be for the BC and Saskatchewan elections. And, of course, when we get them close to the big U.S. election, it might be pretty far from our headquarters in Calgary here, but goddamn, that's going to be fun to watch. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining myself, Cory Morgan, and Dave Naylor here today. But so for all of us here at the Western Standard, we appreciate your time and your support. Take care.